You awaken before the bells, in that liminal space between night and morning, when the castle still breathes in its slumber. The straw mattress beneath you has taken the shape of your body through countless nights, a hollow perfectly fitted to your contours. Above the wooden beams of the ceiling hold shadows that you've memorized like old friends. This one resembling a bird in flight, that one like a face in profile. Your small window cut deep into stone frames, a square of sky that transitions from ink to ash to pearl as dawn approaches. The first sensation is always the cold. It seeps through the stone walls, regardless of season, a permanent resident of this castle. You've learned to befriend it rather than fight it, this cold that clarifies your thoughts and quickens your blood. Your woolen blanket, woven by hands, now gnarled with age, in the village below, holds the warmth of your sleep for those precious moments before you must rise. You listen. This early, you can hear the castle's own awakening, the subtle settling of ancient stones, the distant cooing of pigeons nesting in the towers, the first tentative footsteps of kitchen servants stoking fires. There is something sacred in being awake when others sleep in, witnessing the transition from one state of being to another. You've grown to treasure this solitude, this private ceremony of greeting the day before. Duties consume your attention. The smell of your quarters is a mixture of wood smoke, the lavender you hang in bunches from the rafters, and the particular mustiness that pervades all castle spaces, a scent comprised of centuries of lives lived within these walls. You breathe it in, deliberately using it to anchor yourself to the present moment, to this day that is about to unfold. Your fingers trace the rough texture of the blanket, then the smoother wood of the small chest beside your bed. Inside lies everything you own in this world. A change of clothes, a bone comb passed down from your mother, a small knife with a handle worn, smooth from use, a pouch containing 3 silver coins saved carefully over years, and a smooth stone from the river where you swam as a child. These possessions, modest as they are, represent freedom, possibility, a life beyond these walls, should you ever choose it. The weight of the castle, above and around you, is both protection and constraint. You feel it most in these quiet moments, the hundreds of tons of stone, the centuries of history, the expectations of your role, however humble it might be in the grand scheme of the castle's hierarchy. Yet, there is comfort in this weight, too, a certainty and permanence rare in a world where villages burn, crops fail, and disease sweeps through populations like a scythe through wheat. As the first bell rings, vibrating through stone and air, you rise in a single, practiced motion. Your feet find the floor, cold flagstone, worn smooth by countless footsteps before yours. Your body knows its morning ritual. Without conscious thought, the splash of water from the basin onto your face, the quick combing of hair, the efficient donning of clothes suitable for your station and tasks. The second bell rings as you secure your belt, tie back your hair, and straighten your sleeping space with economical movements. You take a moment to look out your window at the courtyard below, now showing signs of stirring life. A scullery maid crossing with a bucket, a sleepy guard changing position, chimney smoke rising in thin columns from the kitchen. You are both observer and participant in this intricate dance that has continued for centuries before you were born and will continue long after you return to the earth. There is humility in this knowledge, but also a quiet pride. Your hands contribute to the turning of this world. Your presence matters to the daily functioning of this stone universe. With the third bell, you open your door and step into the corridor where others now emerge, nodding silent greetings in the dim light. Together, you descend the narrow spiral staircase, your hands automatically finding the precise spots on the wall where centuries of other hands have polished the stone to a glossy smoothness. Each step carries you further from dreams and closer to the day's demands. This transition from solitude to community happens every morning, this gentle merging of your individual existence into the collective life of the castle. It never fails to fill you with a peculiar mixture of resignation and anticipation. For while the day's work may be demanding, it also brings small joys and unexpected moments of beauty that sustain you until you return to your solitary quarters. When the day is done, the lower you descend, the warmer and louder the world becomes. The smells change too. Wood smoke gives way to baking bread, to herbs being chopped, to the earthy scent of vegetables pulled from the ground. Light grows stronger, voices more numerous. By the time you reach the bottom of the stairs, you are fully present, fully awake, ready to take your place in the intricate machinery of castle life for another day. You have made this journey from sleep to wakefulness, from solitude to community thousands of times, yet each morning carries its own particular quality of light, its own texture of air against your skin, its own constellation of faces and voices that will compose the day ahead. And in this repetition with variation, this familiar journey made slightly new each time you find both comfort and meaning. You carry more than objects as you move through your day within these walls, your hands calloused in specific patterns that mark your particular labor, bear the memory of every task they've performed. The small burn scar on your left palm from that midsummer's feast 3 years ago when you reached too quickly into the oven. The slight bend in your right index finger that never healed properly after the accident with the cartwheel. These marks are a map of your history, written in flesh rather than parchment. You carry knowledge that was never written in books, but passed through demonstration and whispered advice how to tell when bread is perfectly baked by the hollow sound it makes when tapped, which herbs ease a fever, and which soothe a troubled stomach, how to predict tomorrow's weather by the way smoke rises from the chimney today, which nobles can be approached with a direct gaze, and which demand downcast eyes. This wisdom was earned through observation, and sometimes through painful mistakes you try not to repeat. The weight of your keys, if you're fortunate enough to be entrusted with them, clinks softly at your waist, a constant reminder of responsibility. Each one opens a specific door, chest, or cabinet representing small territories of trust. In a world where trust is as valuable as silver, you've learned precisely how to turn each key, how much pressure each lock requires, which ones stick in damp weather and need a gentle coaxing rather than force. You carry relationships in the way you nod to the blacksmith's apprentice, whose name you know but rarely speak, in the silent understanding with the head cook, who gives you an extra portion when no one is looking, in the careful distance you maintain from the steward whose temper turns cold and dangerous when the Lord is away. Each interaction follows rules, both spoken and unspoken, a complex dance you've learned through years of careful study. The fabric of your clothing carries its own significance, its quality color, and cut immediately, identifying your role and rank to everyone you encounter. You've made peace with this external marker of your place in the hierarchy, understanding that what matters more is how you carry yourself within these assigned garments. There is dignity in wearing even the simplest cloth, with care and attention in keeping yourself clean and presentable, despite work that often leaves others disheveled. Less visible is what you carry in memory, the face of your mother who sent you to the castle for a better life than she could provide, the taste of wild berries picked on rare free afternoons, the sound of festival music that made even the oldest servants dance, the feeling of spring sun on your face after a winter that seemed endless. These memories sustain you through monotonous tasks and difficult days, private treasures that no lord can tax or take. You carry secrets too, some your own, and some belonging to others who trusted you enough to share them. The forbidden romance between the falconer's son and the merchant's daughter. The time the castle priest was too drunk to perform Sunday Mass, and a quick-thinking acolyte stepped in without anyone noticing. The hidden passage behind the kitchen hearth that only the oldest servants know about, used in times long past to smuggle food during sieges. Each secret is a small burden, but also a form of power, in a place where most power flows downward. As the day progresses, you accumulate more ephemeral things, the residue of flour on your sleeves, the scent of the herbs you chopped for the midday, meal dirt from the vegetable garden under your nails, sweat that traces paths down your back in the heat of the kitchen. These temporary marks of labor will be washed away before sleep, only to be acquired again tomorrow in slightly different configurations. You carry hopes that you speak of, rarely even to yourself, perhaps a position with slightly more authority and slightly less backbreaking work. As you age, maybe enough saved coins to one day have a small room of your own in the village, rather than the shared quarters, possibly even a family, though the demands of castle service make this difficult for many. These hopes are like small candles, kept sheltered from the wind, neither extravagant nor entirely impossible, and you carry fear, as does everyone within these walls. Fear of illness without the means to treat it, fear of dismissal, and the uncertainty that would follow fear of aging without support, fear of the violence that occasionally erupts in the world beyond the castle gates. This fear is managed through routine, through prayer, if you're so inclined, through the small securities that service provides, and through the community of fellow servants who would help if true disaster struck. Most of all, you carry a profound understanding of your place in the order of things, not just the social hierarchy, but the larger patterns of seasons of birth and death, of the turning years that slowly weather the castle stones, just as they line your face. There is both humility and wisdom in this understanding, a perspective that many nobles, for all their education and privilege, never quite grasp as they focus on the immediate concerns of power and possession. What you carry changes subtly with the years. The physical burdens grow heavier as your body ages, but the emotional ones often lighten as you learn to distinguish between what matters and what doesn't, between what can be changed and what must be accepted. You carry less anger than you did as a youth, more patience, a deeper appreciation for small beauties and kindnesses. As you cross the courtyard in the afternoon light, these invisible burdens and treasures accompany each step. They shape how you hold your body, how you meet others' eyes, how you approach each task. They are, in many ways, more truly you than the visible person. Others see, moving through the castle, spaces performing assigned duties with practiced competence. You've become a student of light within these castle walls, noting its subtle transformations throughout the day with an attention that borders on reverence. Each morning begins with the gray-blue illumination that seeps through your small window, revealing the world in gentle monochrome, before color slowly asserts itself. This light carries a particular quality of stillness, as if the day itself is gathering strength before fully beginning. In the great hall, light behaves differently according to its source. Sunlight entering through the high windows creates distinct shafts that move across the stone floor like sundials occasionally catching dust motes that dance like minuscule courtiers. In their golden paths, candlelight at evening meals transforms the same space into a cavern of flickering shadows and warm pools of amber, turning ordinary faces into mysterious landscapes of highlight and darkness. You've noticed how this softer illumination smooths the edges of hierarchy, making the Lord's daughter's laugh sound momentarily similar to the kitchen maid's. The kitchen exists in its own perpetual atmosphere of diffuse golden light, thanks to the ever-burning fires of hearth and ovens. Here, light is inseparable from heat, from sustenance, from the transformation of raw ingredients into nourishment. You've observed how this constant illumination makes the kitchen staff's faces appear permanently flushed, marked by their proximity to this controlled element that both serves and threatens. You've learned to read the light that fills the courtyard as accurately as any written message. The harsh, white glare of summer noon that sends everyone seeking patches of precious shade. The thin, watery illumination of winter afternoons that seems to apologize for its weakness. The peculiar, golden quality of autumn light that makes even ordinary objects, a wooden bucket, a coil of rope, a weathered door, appear momentarily precious, dipped in honey. Within the chapel, light becomes a deliberate language, filtered through stained glass to create patterns of blue, red, and gold across the stone floor and wooden pews. You've noticed how different biblical scenes are illuminated at different hours of the day, as if the sun itself is choosing which stories to emphasize. The chapel at dawn speaks of sacrifice and resurrection through eastern windows, the same space. At dusk, whispers of judgment and reward through western panes. You pay attention to how light reveals textures that remain hidden in shadow, the intricate grain of wooden tables scrubbed smooth by generations of use, the subtle patterns in stone walls where masons' tools left their marks centuries ago, the weave of fabric in the tapestries that hang against drafty corridors. These details, visible only under certain conditions of illumination, remind you that beauty often resides in what is overlooked. The transition of light through seasons affects not just what you see, but how you feel. The short days of winter, when darkness claims most of your waking hours and candles become precious commodities, carefully rationed, bring a natural turning inward, a contemplative quality to conversation, a deeper appreciation for the circle of bodies around the kitchen. Fire-sharing tales, the endless daylight of midsummer, creates a different energy. Tasks continuing, late into the evening meals taken outdoors, a loosening of some rigid structures as light blurs the boundaries between day and night. You've become attuned to how light changes, faces including your own reflected in still water or polished metal. The Lord's countenance in morning light shows lines and vulnerabilities that court flattery carefully conceals by evening. The beauty of the young noblewoman transforms throughout the day, ethereal at dawn, commanding at noon, mysterious by candlelight. Your own face, glimpsed occasionally, shows different aspects of yourself back to you, depending on when and how the light finds it. There are spaces within the castle where light never fully reaches. The deep storage cellars, the interior of certain corridors, the spaces behind massive furniture, too heavy to move for cleaning. These permanent shadows hold their own fascination, their own ecological systems of small creatures and subtle signs of decay that remind you of the castle's gradual surrender to time, despite all human efforts at preservation. You've noticed how light affects mood and behavior throughout the castle. The gloomy days of endless rain that make tempers short and mistakes more common, the first truly sunny day of spring that causes even the most dignified residents to find excuses to step outside, faces turned upward like flowers. The strange greenish light before a summer storm that hushes conversations and makes everyone glance nervously toward the sky. Most precious are the rare moments when light does something extraordinary. Entering a dusty storeroom through a crack at precisely the right angle to illuminate a forgotten object of beauty, creating a rainbow against the stone wall after rain, catching the edge of a metal goblet during a feast to send a dancing reflection across solemn faces. These brief miracles of illumination remind you that wonder exists not just in grand cathedrals and royal processions, but in ordinary corners. For those patient enough to notice, as you've aged, you've developed a more personal relationship with light. Your eyes require more of it for tasks requiring precision. You find yourself instinctively positioning your work near windows or candles, turning objects to catch the best illumination. This subtle negotiation with light is part of the wisdom of growing older in a world where artificial illumination remains a luxury, not a constant. By the time evening arrives and light retreats from the world, leaving only what fire and flame can provide, you feel the day's illumination collected inside you. Memories of how sunlight felt on your skin in the herb garden, how it transformed a plain wooden table into a landscape of whorls and patterns, how it caught the edge of a smile directed toward you when no one else was looking. This interior light sustains you as darkness claims the castle, as you navigate familiar paths by memory rather than sight, as you prepare for dreams that have their own luminous quality beyond the reach of sun or candle. Your hands possess a wisdom that precedes and often surpasses conscious thought. They know exactly how much pressure the old wooden door to the kitchen requires. Push too gently, and it sticks too forcefully, and it slams, drawing unwanted attention. They've memorized this perfect middle pressure, applying it automatically while your mind might be occupied with the day's tasks or distant memories. When kneading dough, your hands understand what your mind cannot fully articulate. The exact moment when flour and water transform from separate elements into a living thing with its own cohesion and elasticity. They sense the subtle resistance that indicates perfection, the slight warming that occurs as gluten develops. No written recipe could ever capture this knowledge that resides in your fingertips, palms, and wrists. Your hands have developed specific calluses that map your daily work, thickened skin at the base of your fingers, from gripping tools, a toughened patch on your palm, from pushing the heavy wooden laundry, paddle-hardened fingertips from years of needlework by insufficient light. These marks of labor are neither badge nor burden, but simply facts of your existence, physical records of a life spent in service to necessary tasks. They know temperature in ways that defy measurement, how to test bathwater for a noble child without thermometers, how to gauge if a fever is breaking by touching a forehead, how to determine if bread has cooled enough to be wrapped for storage. This intimate relationship with heat and cold was earned through occasional burns and constant practice until such judgments became instinctive. Your hands recognize textures that create the sensory backdrop of your days, the slightly oily smoothness of well-worn wooden spoons, the cool granular feeling of stone walls in the morning, the distinct weaves of different fabrics that must be laundered according to their nature, the particular resistance of certain vegetables to the knife. This tactile library builds a richer understanding of your world than sight alone could provide. They've developed their own intelligence about people as well. You can read volumes in the firmness of a handshake, the temperature of skin during an illness, the tension in a shoulder, being massaged after a long journey. Your hands often know before your mind does when someone is unwell, frightened, or carrying unspoken burdens. There is a particular satisfaction in watching your hands perform complex tasks without conscious direction, threading a needle in light, untangling a knot that defies logic, finding the exact spot where a joint of meat separates most cleanly. In these moments, you step back mentally and become an appreciative witness to this bodily wisdom that has developed over decades of repetition and attention. Your hands possess memories of tasks no longer performed, the precise movement required to use the old well pump that was replaced years ago, the careful way you once folded the previous lord's ceremonial robes before they were passed to his son, the gentle rocking motion that soothed a noble child now grown and married. These phantom actions sometimes assert themselves when you're tired or distracted, your body remembering what your mind has filed away. They've learned patience that your thoughts don't always share, the steady, unhurried movements required for stirring medicinal tinctures that must not be rushed, the gentle persistence needed when working tangles from fine wool without breaking fibers, the controlled strength used when supporting an elderly person down treacherous stairs. This physical patience has gradually influenced your temperament, teaching you that some processes cannot be hurried without damage. Your hands know cooperation intimately. They understand the choreography of shared labor, how to pass hot kitchenware without words, how to lift a burden in unison with another, how to step in and assist when you see another's hands growing tired. This bodily knowledge of working alongside others creates a kind of physical community that exists beneath and sometimes in spite of the social hierarchies that separate castle inhabitants. They've developed an economy of movement that comes only with mastery. No wasted motion, no unnecessary flourish, just the clean efficiency of knowing exactly what needs to be done and the most direct way to accomplish it. This efficiency born of necessity in a life with endless tasks has its own understated beauty that the nobles, with their deliberate, leisurely gestures, rarely achieve. Your hands have learned to create small moments of grace within mundane labor, the perfect folding of linen that transforms ordinary cloth into something dignified, the arrangement of simple wildflowers in a cracked cup that brings unexpected beauty to a windowsill, the careful mending of a tear that makes a garment not just functional again, but respectfully restored. These small acts of attention and care may go unnoticed by others, but provide you with quiet satisfaction. At day's end, when work is finally complete, your hands reveal the story of your hours, perhaps stained with vegetable juices, or carrying the scent of herbs, slightly reddened from hot water, or dusted with flour, bearing new scratches, or temporary indentations from tools. You wash them carefully in the evening, a ritual of transition from labor to rest, watching as the physical evidence of the day's work swirls away with the water. In the quiet, before sleep, you sometimes look at your hands in the dim light, their shape so familiar, yet somehow separate from your sense of self. They bear marks of age, now that weren't there in your youth, prominent veins, spots of darker pigmentation, slight thickening of the knuckles. Yet they remain your most constant companions, your most reliable tools, carrying within them a lifetime of accumulated skill and tactile memory that no possession could equal in value. Between the solid certainty of castle stones exist countless interstitial spaces, gaps, cracks, and crevices that hold their own small universes. You've become an observer of these overlooked realms that exist literally within the walls that define your world. In summer, you've noticed how certain cracks between courtyard paving stones nurture determined little plants, tiny yellow flowers, tenacious mosses, even the occasional strawberry plant, its diminutive red fruit sweeter for being unexpected. The mortar between stones in the older sections of the castle tells stories of time and weather. In some places, particularly on the western walls that face the harshest winter storms, this binding material has worn away, creating spaces where small birds build precarious nests each spring. You've watched generations of swallows return to these same gaps, their mud-built homes clinging to the interface between stones like organic mortar, repairing what time has claimed. When cleaning the great hall during preparation for feasts, your brush encounters the distinct texture of these in-between spaces, collecting dust that has settled into patterns determined by air currents, removing crumbs that mice would otherwise discover during night hours sometimes dislodging a small object lost months or years ago. A copper pin, a bead from a noblewoman's dress, a gaming piece carried away by time's subtle shifting rather than deliberate theft. The spaces between stones breathe with the seasons. In summer heat, they exhale stored coolness from the castle's core. In winter's deep chill, they release the warmth gathered during autumn. You've learned to position yourself strategically near certain walls depending on the weather, finding comfort in this slow respiration of the castle's skeleton that moderates the extremes of the outside world. Some gaps have practical significance in your daily life. The slightly wider space between flagstones near the kitchen door, which puddles during rain and freezes treacherously in winter, requiring careful navigation while carrying heavy trays. The crack in the storeroom wall that admits enough light to help you find what you need without wasting precious candles. The space beneath the great hall door that signals the Lord's mood by the amount of light visible, fully dark when he demands privacy, a thin line of illumination when servants might cautiously enter. You've observed how sound travels through these interstitial spaces in ways that solid stone would block. Conversations in the council chamber sometimes become audible in the servants' corridor one floor below, carried through a particular configuration of gaps in the ancient masonry. This acoustic peculiarity has provided advance warning of changes that would affect those below. New taxes, preparations for war marriages being arranged. Knowledge gained not through deliberate eavesdropping, but through the castle's own inadvertent whispers. The oldest residents speak of hidden spaces between walls, secret passages built into the original castle, designed for escape during sieges or for observation of guests. Most believe these tales exaggerated, yet occasionally, during cleaning or repairs, you've glimpsed oddly shaped cavities that serve no obvious structural purpose, spaces large enough for a person to navigate if they knew the way in. These potential passages remain one of the castle's mysteries, neither confirmed nor entirely dismissed. In your years of observation, you've noticed how different creatures claim these interstitial spaces according to their nature. Spiders weave intricate webs across corners where stone meets stone, creating gossamer architectures that catch both dust and light. Mice establish complex societies within the larger walls, their scratching movements forming a subtle soundtrack to quiet nights. Even the castle cats understand these gaps, waiting patiently beside particular crevices where experience has taught them prey will eventually emerge. Beyond physical gaps, you've become attuned to temporal spaces between. The brief pause between the bell announcing dinner and the actual arrival of nobles at the table, a precious interval for last adjustments to settings and service. The quiet hour between the completion of night duties and actual sleep, when servants finally claim time for themselves to mend clothing, share stories, or simply rest in companionable silence. The suspension of normal hierarchies during certain festivals, when lord and servant might briefly drink from the same cask or dance to the same music, separated by less rigid boundaries than usual. Most subtle are the social spaces between defined roles, the territories not clearly governed by castle's protocol, where more authentic human connections sometimes form. The head cook, who treats you with gruff affection That is neither the deference she shows to nobles, nor the strict authority she displays to kitchen maids. The aging knight who speaks to you with unexpected respect when you bring his evening meal, occupying a conversational space that acknowledges neither his higher station nor treats you as a mere servant. These interactions exist in the unmarked territory between the castle's rigid categories. You've learned that these interstitial spaces, physical, temporal, and social, offer both danger and opportunity. They are where the castle's official narrative sometimes frays to reveal more complex truths, where strict boundaries become permeable enough to allow unexpected connections, where small freedoms can be found precisely because these spaces fall between the clearly defined territories that authority monitors most carefully. As years pass, you've developed an almost unconscious mapping of these spaces between stones. You know which gaps widen with seasonal changes, which have remained constant for decades, which have been repaired so many times they now hold more new mortar than original. This knowledge becomes another layer of your relationship with the castle, an intimate understanding of not just its solid presence, but its countless small absences, the negative spaces that define its true character as surely as the stones themselves. In moments of quiet reflection, you sometimes wonder if you yourself exist in a type of interstitial space, neither entirely free nor completely bound, occupying a life that fits into the gaps of the castle's grander narrative. This thought brings neither resentment nor particular comfort, just a recognition that perhaps all lives are lived to some extent in the spaces between more defined and documented existences, and in this recognition comes a certain peace, a sense of belonging to something both smaller and larger than the official history these stones will carry forward long after you are gone. The castle has taught you that sound behaves differently depending on architecture, material, and human intention. You've mapped its acoustic geography as carefully as its physical layout, learning where voices carry and where they remain contained, where whispers are safe, and where even breathing seems audible to distant ears. The great hall, with its high, vaulted ceiling and hard surfaces, transforms ordinary conversation into a complex tapestry of echoes. When empty, a dropped spoon becomes a small percussion orchestra. When full during feasts, it creates a particular quality of sound. Dozens of conversations merging into a single living entity that rises and falls like the breath of some great beast. You've noticed how the nobles seated at the high table develop a particular way of speaking in this space, projecting their voices just enough to be heard by their immediate companions without carrying to unwanted ears. By contrast, the kitchen operates in a different acoustic realm entirely. Its lower ceilings and constant background noise of chopping, sizzling, and water being poured create a space where conversations remain relatively private, despite many bodies working in close proximity. Secrets can be exchanged over onions, being diced, instructions given while bread is kneaded, gossip shared while turning meat on spits, all protected by the kitchen's constant symphony of domestic sound. The stone corridors possess their own peculiar properties, sometimes carrying whispers around corners with surprising clarity, while completely muffling louder conversations depending on where speakers stand. You've identified certain junctions where sound collects, places where corridors meet, or where spiral staircases create unusual acoustic channels. Servants learn to avoid these spots when discussing sensitive matters, or alternatively to position themselves strategically there when wanting to overhear without being seen. You've observed how different materials in the castle create their own sound signatures. The hollow wooden floors in the upper chambers that announce every footstep despite attempts at quiet movement. The thick tapestries in formal receiving rooms that absorb sound, creating spaces where conversations feel unusually intimate and contained. The flagstones of the courtyard that amplify certain frequencies while dampening others, making women's voices carry further than men's on still evenings. Weather transforms the castle's soundscape in predictable patterns. Rain on the slate roofs creates a gentle, continuous percussion that seems to slow the pace of movement and conversation throughout the building. Winter brings a particular quality of silence as snow dampens the outside world, making interior sounds seem more defined and present. Strong winds cause subtle moans and whistles as they find the castle's every gap and imperfection a reminder of the constant negotiation between human architecture and natural forces. The daily rhythm of castle life can be tracked by sound alone. The distinctive metal-on-metal percussion of the blacksmith beginning work at dawn. The change in tempo of kitchen sounds as mealtime approaches, from the slower, more deliberate movements of preparation to the quickened pace of final assembly and service. The gradual diminuendo of activity after the evening meal, voices becoming fewer and softer until only the night watch remains their measured footsteps, marking the hours of darkness. Certain individuals possess voices that have become part of the castle's acoustic character. The steward's distinctive throat clearing that signals his approach long before he appears. The head cook's particular way of calling for assistance that manages to penetrate every corner of the kitchen, regardless of existing noise. The Lord's daughter's laugh, a sound that seems to dance above other conversations like a bird riding air currents, impossible to ignore when it appears. You've learned the social language of volume, how status is often marked by who must strain to hear and who can be heard without effort. The Lord speaks more softly than one might expect, secure in the knowledge that others will quiet themselves to catch his words. Servants develop the ability to communicate essential information at a volume just below what would be noticed by their betters. The castle children, not yet fully indoctrinated into these unwritten rules, provide occasional acoustic disruption with their natural volumes that ignore social boundaries. Music transforms the castle spaces in ways that ordinary sound cannot. During celebrations when musicians play in the Great Hall, the entire structure seems to respond. Stone, wood, and glass, each resonating according to their nature. You've noticed how these occasions temporarily dissolve some boundaries, as everyone, from nobles to kitchen staff, finds themselves moved by the same melodies, their bodies responding to identical rhythms, despite all that separates them. Most revealing are the sounds that emerge during supposed silence, the collective exhalation when tension is released after the Lord makes an important announcement, the subtle shifting of weight when a sermon in the chapel continues too long, the nearly imperceptible murmur of servant communication During formal dinners, information passed through minimal movement of lips, barely vocalized, yet essential to coordinated service. Night brings its own distinctive soundscape. The gradual transition from human activity to the castle's own nocturnal vocabulary, the settling of timbers, as temperature changes, the scurrying of mice behind walls, the occasional mournful call of an owl from the tower where it nests. During these hours, sounds take on heightened significance. A cough from the guard position at the gate, the creak of a door opening when all should be closed, the unexpected sound of footsteps when most are sleeping. Each carries meaning and potential consequence. You've developed your own relationship with the production and interpretation of sound. Your footsteps have acquired the particular quality expected of your position, neither too loud, suggesting importance you don't possess, nor too timid, indicating fear or guilt. Your voice modulates automatically, depending on who you're addressing and where the conversation takes place. You've learned to hear what isn't being explicitly said, the hesitation before a response that signals untruth, the slight raise in pitch that betrays anxiety despite calm words. In this world, where literacy remains limited, where written records are the domain of scribes and clergy, sound carries information with an immediacy and accessibility that transcends social boundaries. The castle bell announces time and significant events to all ears equally. The herald's proclamations reach noble and servant alike. The sounds of approach, whether friendly merchants or hostile forces, provide universal warning that doesn't distinguish between those who can read and those who cannot. As you move through your day, this complex acoustic environment forms an essential layer of your experience, as important as what you see or touch, as informative as any formal communication. You've become a skilled navigator of this invisible landscape, reading its patterns and anomalies with an expertise that comes only through years of attentive listening to how voices and sounds carry through the living stone around you. Within the castle walls, seasons announce themselves through subtle shifts rather than dramatic transformations. You've learned to notice the first harbingers of change long before others remark upon them, the particular quality of light that arrives in late February, holding the first suggestion of spring, while snow still covers the ground, the specific morning in August, when the air first carries the crisp edge of approaching autumn, despite summer's continuing heat. Spring enters the castle gradually, appearing first in the protected southern corner of the herb garden, where chives push their slender green spears through barely thawed soil. The kitchen's demands shift as winter stores dwindle, meals becoming simpler as you wait for new growth. Creativity born from necessity, as preserved foods are transformed through careful seasoning and presentation. Windows sealed against winter drafts for months are cautiously reopened, allowing fresh air to circulate through chambers that have held the accumulated odors of bodies, candle smoke, and limited bathing. This season brings particular sounds after winter's relative quiet. Birdsong returns to the courtyard, growing more complex and insistent as nesting begins in every available cranny of the castle walls. The quality of human voices changes too, conversations lingering longer in outdoor spaces, laughter coming more easily, as bodies emerge from the confinement of indoor living. Children's games resume in the courtyard, their calls forming a daily soundtrack that measures the lengthening daylight as evening play stretches later into each day. Spring's labor has its own rhythm, the intensive cleaning that follows winter's necessary neglect of hard-to-reach spaces, the sorting of fabrics and furnishings damaged by months of dampness and smoke, the preparation of gardens with tools that feel awkward in hands, that have forgotten their particular weight and balance since last season. Your body remembers these movements before your mind does muscles, anticipating the specific strain of turning soil and scrubbing stone. Summer arrives with increasing human traffic through the castle gates, merchants bringing goods from distant markets, travelers seeking lodging, nobles making social calls that were impossible on winter roads. The castle population swells temporarily with these visitors, creating additional work, but also bringing new stories and occasional gifts that connect your isolated world to distant places you'll likely never see yourself. The kitchen transforms into a crucible of heat and activity. As summer advances, fires burning despite the season to preserve the abundance of fruits and vegetables that arrive daily from gardens and orchards. You develop a particular relationship with time during these weeks, racing against the inevitable spoilage of berries and soft fruits, calculating precisely how much can be processed before quality deteriorates. The satisfaction of filled, preserving jars lined in storerooms provides visible evidence of labor converted to future security. Summer nights bring their own small freedoms. Sleeping with windows open to catch any breeze, occasional permission to take simple meals outdoors, the possibility of washing in the river rather than with carefully rationed indoor water. The castle stones themselves become characters in summer's story, absorbing heat during daylight hours, then releasing it slowly after sunset, creating pockets of warmth in unexpected corners of the courtyard, where conversations continue by starlight. Autumn announces itself through changing light first, the golden quality that transforms ordinary objects, the earlier sunsets that gradually compress outdoor activities into shorter periods. The harvest creates its own demanding choreography, as castle storerooms must be prepared, inventoried, and filled for the coming winter. You've learned the precise organization that allows maximum storage in limited space, which vegetables keep longest and must be positioned for latest access, which preserves might spoil first and should be placed where they'll be used earlier. The castle's social patterns shift with autumn's arrival. Meals move back indoors as evening chill returns, bodies gathering closer around sources of heat, conversations becoming more sustained as outdoor tasks diminish. The Lord's family returns from summer travels, re-establishing formal routines that may have relaxed slightly in their absence. Preparations begin for winter celebrations that will punctuate the coming months of darkness, creating crucial markers of time when days grow short and similar. The first frost transforms the herb garden, overnight leaving plants that were vibrant suddenly blackened and translucent. This annual reminder of impermanence always carries a particular melancholy that you've learned to accept rather than resist. There is wisdom in the cycle of growth and retreat, a necessary rhythm that applies to human lives as surely as to gardens. You harvest the last usable herbs before full winter arrives, hanging bundles from kitchen rafters, where they slowly surrender their moisture and concentrate their essential oils. Winter descends with its own distinct personality each year, sometimes arriving abruptly with dramatic snowfall, other years creeping in gradually with increasing cold and diminishing light. The castle contracts around its sources of heat, with rooms farthest from hearths abandoned until spring or used only for cold storage. Daily life reorganizes around the fundamental challenge of maintaining warmth. Additional layers of clothing appear, sleeping arrangements shift to share body heat. Work requiring manual dexterity is scheduled during daylight hours when fingers remain nimble. The winter castle operates at a different pace. Certain tasks become impossible, while others gain prominence. Indoor activities dominate the repair of tools and equipment that will be needed in spring, the mending of garments worn thin through the year, the spinning and weaving that transforms raw fiber into fabric. Storytelling flourishes in the extended darkness, with servants gathering in the kitchen after duties, are complete, sharing tales that connect present hardship to ancestral endurance through countless similar winters. This season reveals the true nature of the castle's construction, which rooms retain heat and which surrender it quickly, which corridors channel frigid drafts, which walls develop dangerous ice on their exterior faces. You've learned to navigate this winter geography instinctively, choosing particular routes through the building, depending on whether warmth or speed is the greater priority, positioning your sleeping space to benefit from rising heat while avoiding direct drafts. The winter night sky viewed from the castle walls during clear evenings offers a particular comfort, stars appearing more brilliant against cold darkness than summer's softer heavens. You've learned to read this celestial calendar, noting the gradual shifting of constellations that promises spring's eventual return long before other signs appear. This knowledge, passed from one generation of castle dwellers to the next, creates continuity between your temporary existence and the more permanent cycles of the world beyond stone walls. As winter eventually surrenders to earliest spring, completing the annual cycle, you feel a complex emotion that combines relief at surviving another difficult season with appreciation for what each period offers in its particular character. The castle has taught you that each season brings both challenges and gifts, that none is entirely good or bad, but simply necessary in the continuous unfolding of time. This understanding extends beyond weather to the seasons of human life as well. Youth, maturity, and aging, each carrying their own essential qualities that cannot be rushed or avoided without diminishing the complete experience of being alive within these ancient walls. Beyond spoken words and written text, the castle has developed numerous alternative languages that operate beneath the surface of daily life. You've become fluent in many of these unwritten forms of communication, reading and responding to their nuances as naturally as breathing. The language of bells is perhaps the most universal. Different patterns and durations, signaling time meals, prayers, celebrations, warnings, or deaths. Each purpose has its distinctive voice, recognizable even to children and visitors who quickly learn to adjust their activities according to these bronze-tongued announcements. The placement of objects constitutes another silent vocabulary. A broom left leaning against the kitchen doorway indicates the floor remains wet and dangerous. Keys, positioned on certain hooks in the steward's quarters, communicate which nobles are currently in residence. Dishes arranged in particular configurations tell kitchen staff which courses have been served and which remain. Over years, you've absorbed these spatial communications without conscious study, your hands automatically responding to their instructions. Clothing speaks volumes in the castle's social context. The quality of fabric, the style of cut, the presence or absence of embellishment, all instantly identify the wearer's status role and sometimes specific function for that day. You've learned that certain nobles don woolen garments when expecting to deliver unpleasant news to petitioners, that the steward wears his chain of office only when directly representing the Lord's authority, that kitchen staff tie their aprons differently depending on whether feast day or ordinary service is being prepared. The body itself communicates through a sophisticated grammar of posture and position. A servant standing precisely 3 steps inside a doorway, eyes lowered to a specific angle, hands clasped at exactly the right height. This physical configuration silently announces the arrival of a message requiring acknowledgement. The Lord, leaning slightly forward or back in his chair during audiences, conveys his receptiveness to petitions more clearly than words. Even breathing patterns become meaningful indicators. The collective held breath when tension fills the council chamber, the measured inhalations of the chapel during prayer, the quicker rhythms of the kitchen during meal preparation. Gardens cultivate their own symbolic language, with plants positioned to communicate meaning beyond mere decoration or utility. Certain herbs placed near windows serve as subtle insect repellents. Specific flowers planted in particular patterns reflect the family heraldry without explicitly reproducing it. Fruit trees espaliered against south-facing walls not only maximize sun exposure, but demonstrate the Lord's power to bend nature to geometric human will. You've noticed how visiting nobles read these botanical statements, their comments revealing recognition of the status claims being made through seemingly innocent horticulture. Food presents perhaps the most nuanced language of all. Ingredients, preparation methods, serving order and portion size, each carrying distinct messages about hierarchy, season, wealth, and relationship. The presentation of particular dishes to specific guests communicates favor or slight that everyone at the table immediately understands. You've witnessed entire political negotiations conducted through the offering and accepting of specific foods without a single direct word about the matters at hand. The castle's stones themselves speak through patterns of wear that reveal human movement over centuries. Floors depressed where countless feet have followed identical paths, stairs worn to curved hollows, at their center's walls polished to a soft sheen precisely at the height where hands habitually steady themselves when passing. These physical records of collective human behavior form a historical document more accurate than any chronicle, showing not what people claim to do, but what they actually did, day after day, year after year. Animals contribute their own communications to the castle's linguistic ecosystem. The particular agitation of chickens that forecasts storms more accurately than human prediction the distinctive bark that announces a familiar visitor, approaching rather than a stranger, the sudden silence of birds that serves as warning more reliable than any human lookout. Through observation, you've learned to translate these animal utterances into information relevant to human concerns. Time manifests as language through the subtle changes in light quality throughout the day and year. Regular inhabitants develop an internal clock calibrated to the castle's specific orientation and architecture, knowing without conscious thought that when sunlight reaches a particular point, the great hall floor, the noon meal should be ready. That when shadows assume a certain angle in the courtyard, it's time to light evening lamps. That when the light acquires a specific golden quality, autumn has truly arrived, regardless of the calendar date. Music and song serve as repositories for knowledge that might otherwise be lost, particularly among servants with limited literacy. Work songs contain embedded instructions for tasks, their rhythms indicating proper pacing, their lyrics containing reminders about technique or sequence. Lullabies preserve family histories, local legends, and practical wisdom disguised as simple entertainment for children. Festival music carries cultural memories of events too distant for any living person to recall directly. Fire speaks its own distinctive language that you've learned to interpret through years of careful attention. The specific color and shape of flames in the kitchen hearth indicates the oven's readiness for different types of baking. The particular crackle of certain woods provides warning of hidden moisture that might cause dangerous sparking. The quality of smoke rising from chimneys reveals the skill of the person tending each fire. Thin blue smoke indicating proper balance of fuel and air. Thick, dark emissions betraying neglect or inexperience. Perhaps most subtle is the language of silence, the different qualities of soundlessness that convey distinct meanings throughout the castle. The expectant hush before an important announcement differs tangibly from the comfortable quiet of routine tasks being performed together. The strained silence following an angry outburst carries a different texture than the peaceful stillness of early morning. The absence of certain expected sounds, the missing footsteps of someone usually punctual, the unheard voice of a usually vocal participant, often communicates more clearly than any spoken statement. You've become multilingual in these unwritten languages through years of immersion, developing an intuitive fluency that allows you to navigate the castle's complex social and practical environment without relying solely on explicit instruction. This knowledge resides not in your conscious mind, but in your body, your senses, your instinctive responses to subtle cues that outsiders might miss entirely. It constitutes a form of wisdom that cannot be recorded in books or taught in formal lessons, yet proves essential to survival and success within the castle walls. As you've aged, you've occasionally found yourself serving as translator of these hidden languages for newcomers, not through formal explanation, which would seem strange and possibly inappropriate, but through gentle guidance, subtle modeling, and patient correction when they misinterpret the castle's silent communications. This transmission of unwritten knowledge forms one of your contributions to the continuity of life within these walls, a legacy as real, though less visible, than any physical object you might leave behind. Rest within the castle's rhythm is never simply the absence of labor, but rather a different kind of presence, a deliberate shifting of attention and energy that you've refined into its own art form. You've learned that true rest isn't merely collapsing from exhaustion when work finally ends, but creating intentional spaces of recovery even within demanding days. The brief pause you take while carrying water from the well to the kitchen, just long enough for 3 deep breaths while adjusting your grip on the bucket handles. The moment of stillness after sweeping a room before moving to the next task, allowing dust to settle both literally in the air and figuratively in your mind. The deliberate slowing of movements while polishing silver or brass, transforming what could be rushed labor into a meditative practice that rests your thoughts, if not your hands. These micro-rests punctuate your day like the spaces between words in a sentence giving meaning to the activity on either side. Mealtimes offer their own form of respite, though they rarely involve complete cessation of responsibility. While nobles dine in the great hall, servants maintain a constant quiet vigilance. Yet there is still a different quality to this work compared to the more physically demanding tasks of other hours. Standing at proper attention along walls between courses allows a particular type of physical recovery where weight shifts subtly from foot to foot, where breath can be regulated deliberately, where muscles that have been actively engaged can temporarily release their tension while maintaining appropriate posture. Your own meals taken either before or after serving the castle's higher residents have evolved into small ceremonies of restoration. You've noticed how the oldest servants eat with particular attention, chewing thoroughly, appreciating distinct flavors even in simple food, using these moments to fully inhabit their senses rather than allowing thoughts to race ahead to upcoming duties. You've adopted this practice yourself, finding that even the humblest portion becomes more satisfying and sustaining when approached with mindful appreciation. The changing seasons dictate different patterns of rest. Summer allows brief outdoor pauses, perhaps sitting on a sun-warmed stone wall for a few precious minutes, while ostensibly waiting for herbs to be gathered or laundry to dry. Winter concentrates rest around sources of heat, with tasks deliberately organized to provide periodic proximity to kitchen fires or hall hearths, where cold-stiffened joints can temporarily loosen and circulation return to chilled extremities. Nighttime brings its own particular quality of rest, though rarely the uninterrupted sleep that nobles might enjoy. Your rest often comes in segments. The deeper sleep of early night, when exhaustion claims you completely followed, by the lighter, more intermittent rest of early morning, when awareness hovers closer to the surface, ready to respond to bells or calls for assistance. You've learned to surrender to this pattern rather than fight it, to appreciate the different qualities of these sleep phases rather than measuring them against some imagined ideal of perfect continuous slumber. The spaces where you rest carry their own significance. Your sleeping quarters, shared with others of similar station, offer a different kind of privacy than solitude. The familiar breathing of longtime companions, creating a boundary of sound that defines a collective but still personal space. The particular corner of your bed that you've claimed through years of consistent use, with its straw mattress compressed to the exact shape of your body, provides a physical welcome at days, and that expensive feather beds might not improve upon. Your body has developed its own wisdom about rest, sometimes overriding your conscious intentions. The involuntary nodding off during rare moments of inactivity, perhaps while waiting for bread to finish baking or for a noble to complete a lengthy prayer, represents your physical self claiming what your schedule doesn't willingly provide. You've learned not to fight these momentary surrenders, understanding that they allow continuation of the longer journey rather than threatening its completion. Certain tasks, paradoxically, provide rest through their very familiarity and rhythm. The repetitive motion of polishing wood with beeswax, following the grain with circular movements until the surface gleams with a soft luster. The steady, unthinking pace of shelling peas or pitting cherries in seasoned hands, working independently, while mind wanders or empties entirely. The gentle back and forth of rocking a noble infant when assigned nursery duty, a motion that soothes both child and caregiver through its predictable continuity. The castle's religious observances offer structured intervals of rest disguised as duty. The required attendance at chapel services provides periods of sitting rather than standing, of listening rather than speaking, of being present without being responsible for action. Even for those whose faith might be perfunctory or questioned privately, these ceremonial pauses in the day's labor offer genuine physical and mental restoration within their prescribed rituals. You've developed strategies for resting specific parts of your body while others remain engaged, shifting weight subtly from one foot to the other while standing during long ceremonies, alternating which arm bears greater burden when carrying, heavy loads changing, grip or position slightly during extended manual tasks to distribute strain differently across muscles and joints. This incremental self-care allows you to endure days that would otherwise break down even the strongest body. Dreams constitute a particular form of rest, unique to each person, yet universally experienced. Your dreams often rework the day's events into new configurations, sometimes processing frustrations or fears that cannot be safely expressed during waking hours, sometimes offering surprising solutions to practical problems encountered in your work. You've come to value these nocturnal journeys not as mere fantasy, but as another form of intelligence operating beyond conscious control, providing a different kind of renewal than physical sleep alone. As you've aged, you've noticed changes in how your body demands and utilizes rest. The young servant you once were could push through extreme fatigue. Through sheer determination, your current self requires more strategic conservation of energy, more intentional intervals of recovery. Rather than resenting this shift, you've come to appreciate the wisdom it enforces, a more measured approach to tasks, a more realistic assessment of what can be accomplished in a day, a more compassionate relationship with your physical limitations. Perhaps most important is the rest you've learned to give your spirit through small private rituals invisible to others. The moment of appreciation for early morning light, creating patterns on stone walls before anyone else is awake to notice. The silent acknowledgement of seasons changing, marked by the first snowdrop pushing through soil in the garden, the brief prayer or meditation, or simply conscious breath taken before entering a difficult situation. These moments of interior stillness create a reservoir of resilience that sustains you through external demands, a form of rest that refreshes something deeper than muscle or bone. In a world where your time is rarely your own, you've discovered that how you rest, the quality of attention you bring to these intervals between labor, matters as much as how you work. This understanding doesn't make the physical demands any less challenging, but it transforms how you carry them, how you recover from them, and ultimately how you find meaning within, rather than despite them. Beneath the visible choreography of castle life exists a shadow reality, actions, relationships, and knowledge that remain deliberately unseen by those in power, yet are essential to the true functioning of this stone world. You've become both participant in and guardian of these hidden dimensions, understanding their necessity without needing to articulate it explicitly. The network of mutual aid among servants operates entirely below the notice of nobles who might mistake it for simple friendship if they observed it at all. When illness strikes a kitchen maid, others seamlessly absorb her duties without official reassignment, ensuring that work is completed while allowing crucial recovery time. When the stable boy's mother dies in the village, extra portions from the kitchen mysteriously find their way to him for weeks afterward, nourishing both body and spirit during grief. This collective care system requires no formal organization, yet responds with remarkable efficiency to need wherever it appears. Spatial knowledge constitutes another invisible layer of castle life. Servants navigate the building through different pathways than nobles, utilizing narrow backstairs, service corridors, and connecting passageways that allow them to appear precisely where needed, while seeming to vanish when their presence might intrude. You know exactly which floorboards creak and must be avoided during late errands near sleeping chambers, which doors can be opened silently if hinges are touched in particular places, which walls are thin enough that conversations on the other side might be overheard. This specialized geography remains largely unknown to those who have never needed to move unobtrusively through their own home. Information flows through the castle via hidden channels that parallel but rarely intersect with official communications. Long before announcements are made about visiting dignitaries, planned hunts, or upcoming marriages, this news has already circulated through the whispered exchanges over laundry basins or during brief passages in corridors. The cook knows to adjust coming meals for a noble's illness before being officially informed, because the chamber servant has already shared this observation while collecting kitchen scraps for chickens. The groom prepares the lord's favorite mount for an unscheduled journey because patterns of activity in the great hall have signaled preparations invisible to those not trained to notice them. Objects themselves maintain secret lives within the castle economy. The careful redistribution of leftover food that never officially becomes theft because categories are thoughtfully maintained, bones ostensibly taken for dogs that still contain enough meat to flavor a servant's soup, bread edges removed for aesthetic presentation that become a guard's midnight meal, the systematic repurposing of discarded items, candle stubs melted together to create new lights for servant quarters, fabric scraps from noble garments transformed into children's toys or practical household items, broken furniture disassembled to repair other pieces or provide firewood during the coldest nights. Language itself operates differently in these hidden realms. Servants develop coded terms and expressions that allow them to communicate essential information in the presence of nobles without being understood. References to weather conditions might actually indicate a lord's mood. Comments about a particular food could signal caution about a visiting noble's servant who cannot be trusted. Casual mentions of village events might contain embedded information about romantic relationships developing below stairs. This parallel vocabulary allows for necessary communication while maintaining the appearance of mundane conversation. The emotional reality of castle inhabitants remains largely invisible across social boundaries. The lord sees only the steward's efficient management of household accounts, not his nightly struggle with pain from an old injury sustained in the lord's service. The lady appreciates her lady's maid's perfect arrangement of her hair without recognizing the skill developed through years of practice on willing fellow servants. The visible performance of roles reveals nothing about the rich interior lives behind carefully maintained expressions. The dreams, worries, private joys, and personal sorrows that animate each person regardless of station. Knowledge itself is distributed unevenly and often inversely to formal authority. The highest noble may understand political alliances and military strategy while remaining ignorant of how food reaches his table beyond the most superficial awareness. Meanwhile, the lowest kitchen worker likely knows precisely which local farms provide which ingredients, how weather patterns have affected this year's harvest, which preservation methods yield the best results for different foods, and how to stretch limited supplies during hard times. Practical wisdom that ultimately determines whether grand political plans can be sustained through winter months or extended conflicts. Time functions differently in servant spaces than in noble ones. While the lord might experience the castle as a place where needs are met almost instantaneously, fires lit, meals appeared, clothes cleaned, and replaced with minimal awareness of the processes involved. Those who perform these tasks inhabit a continuous flow of preparation and anticipation. The evening meal that lasts 2 hours for nobles represents the culmination of days of planning, hours of cooking, and will generate additional hours of cleaning. This temporal disjunction means servants simultaneously inhabit the present moment alongside its past preparations and future consequences in ways that those they serve rarely need to consider. Physical intimacy creates another realm of invisible knowledge. The body servant who assists with bathing knows the lord's physical vulnerabilities and changes in ways his political advisors never will. The laundress recognizes patterns in stained sheets that reveal private behaviors and health conditions never discussed openly. The nurse who tends noble children holds memories of their early fears and attachments that formal tutors will never access. This corporeal knowledge carries its own power, rarely leveraged directly, but creating a more complete understanding of supposedly superior beings than they might wish to acknowledge. Perhaps most significant is the invisible moral economy that operates among those who maintain the castle's daily functions. Certain actions are understood as unacceptable without ever being explicitly named as such. Taking the last portion when others haven't eaten, failing to warn colleagues about a particularly demanding visitor, breaking the silence about mistakes that could be covered without harm to anyone. This ethical framework operates largely through example, rather than instruction through raised eyebrows and redirected conversations, rather than confrontation, yet maintains standards of behavior essential to collective survival. You've learned to move comfortably within these unseen dimensions of castle life, understanding that their invisibility to certain eyes is not accidental, but necessary. The separation between what is officially acknowledged and what actually occurs creates breathing space within an otherwise rigid social structure, allowing human needs and connections to find expression despite formal limitations. This parallel reality doesn't undermine the castle's hierarchy so much as make it sustainable, creating sufficient flexibility within seemingly immovable stone to accommodate the complex, contradictory requirements of human community. As years pass, you find yourself automatically inducting newer, younger servants into these invisible systems, not through formal instruction, but through small gestures, meaningful glances, strategic silences, and carefully timed revelations. This transmission of unseen knowledge constitutes its own form of inheritance, maintaining continuity of human wisdom that runs deeper than the official histories inscribed in castle chronicles, yet proves just as essential to its continued existence. Time manifests differently within castle walls than in the world beyond, creating its own particular gravity that you've learned to navigate through years of immersion. The stones themselves embody a different time scale than human lives, walls that have witnessed generations of births, deaths, celebrations, and ordinary days without visible change beyond the gradual softening of edges and deepening of patinas. You've come to understand yourself as a temporary inhabitant of a more permanent structure, your entire lifespan representing just a brief chapter in the castle's longer story. The daily rhythm within these walls follows patterns established centuries before your birth. The same bells ring at the same hours, calling to the same activities. The same seasonal tasks unfold in predictable sequence. Even the paths worn into stone floors by countless feet follow identical routes year after year. This temporal consistency provides both comfort and constraint, a reliable framework that organizes existence while sometimes making individual days blur indistinguishably into one another in memory. You measure personal time through subtle markers rather than dramatic events. The gradually deepening creases around your eyes, noted in rare glimpses of reflection, the increasing ease with which you perform tasks that once required conscious attention, the shifting relationships with those who entered service after you as you transition imperceptibly from being instructed to becoming the one who instructs, the accumulation of small injuries and adaptations that your body carries as its own private calendar of experience. The castle maintains multiple concurrent time frames that you've learned to hold simultaneously in awareness. The immediate urgency of tasks that must be completed before the next meal is served. The medium-term cycles of seasonal work that repeat annually. The preserving of summer abundance. The deep cleaning of spring. The constant battle against winter cold. The longer arc of human lives unfolding around you. Children growing into adults. adults aging into elders, the gradual succession of one generation by the next, and beneath it all, the geological patience of the castle itself, measuring time in centuries rather than hours or years. Artifacts throughout the castle collapse time in tangible ways you've come to appreciate. The table in the great hall, its surface worn into subtle depressions, precisely where arms have rested during countless meals, connects your gestures directly to those who sat in the same spots generations earlier. The sword displayed above the fireplace, carried by the current Lord's great-grandfather in battles, now remembered only in songs, makes history physical rather than abstract. The ancient apple tree in the inner courtyard, still producing fruit each autumn despite its gnarled appearance, provides living continuity with castle inhabitants who tasted its harvest centuries ago. Weather and seasons impose their own temporal rhythm that transcends human scheduling. No matter what activities might be planned, a sudden summer storm forces adaptation. Regardless of unfinished autumn tasks, the first deep freeze arrives according to its own timetable. You've observed how nobles sometimes rage against these natural interruptions, while experienced servants simply adjust, understanding that certain time frames remain beyond human control. Despite the castle's attempt to impose order on existence, celebrations and ceremonies throughout the year create temporal landmarks that help differentiate one year from another in memory. The midwinter feast, with its particular foods and traditions, the spring blessing of fields and flocks, the midsummer night festivities, with their temporary suspension of ordinary hierarchies, the harvest, home, marking the completion of gathering. These events provide structure to the year while connecting present experience to cultural continuity, allowing you to locate yourself within both cyclical and linear time simultaneously. The physical layout of the castle itself embodies time with different sections representing distinct historical periods. The oldest tower, with its enormously thick walls and narrow windows, speaks of an era when defense was the primary concern. The Great Hall, with its soaring ceiling and elaborate decoration, represents a later period of greater security and prosperity. The newer wing, with its larger windows and more comfortable chambers, reflects changing priorities and technologies. Moving through these spaces throughout your day means traversing centuries of architectural evolution, a physical journey through time, made so familiar you rarely consciously notice it. Different tasks connect you to different temporal experiences. Some activities demand complete presence in the immediate moment. The careful turning of bread at precisely the right moment to prevent burning the focused attention required when serving nobles during formal dinners, where a single mistake might be remembered for years. Other responsibilities encourage a broader temporal awareness. The planting of saplings that won't provide significant shade until long after your death, the training of younger servants who will continue work you began, the maintenance of traditions whose origins have been forgotten, but whose continuation feels essential to the castle's identity. You've noticed how status often correlates with relationship to time. Those highest in the castle hierarchy generally focus on longer time frames. The lord concerned with dynasty and legacy, the steward planning seasons ahead, the master mason thinking in terms of structural integrity lasting centuries. Those in humbler positions typically operate in more immediate temporal frames. The kitchen maid focused on completing her current task before beginning the next, the stable boy attentive to the immediate needs of horses in his care. Your own position allows you to bridge these perspectives, understanding both immediate necessities and longer patterns. Age brings its own shifting relationship with castle time. As a young servant, you experience the years as something approaching endlessness, each season seemingly identical to the last, the future stretching ahead in apparently unlimited supply. Now, having seen how quickly decades actually pass, you find yourself more conscious of finite nature of your own timeline within the castle's more permanent existence. This awareness brings both a sharper appreciation for present experience and a deeper connection to those who will continue these patterns after you no longer participate in them. Perhaps most profound is how the castle has taught you to recognize different qualities of time rather than merely its quantity. The stretched, suspended moments of dawn when the building seems to hold its breath before daily activity begins. The accelerated hours of intense work when a feast is being prepared and every minute must yield maximum productivity. The weighted silence of midnight when your awareness expands to include sleeping bodies throughout the structure unified, briefly in shared vulnerability, despite daytime divisions. The peculiar timelessness of certain spaces, the chapel with its permanent twilight, created by stained glass, the deep cellars where temperature remains constant, regardless of surface weather, the hidden garden corner, where you sometimes retreat when duties allow. This nuanced relationship with time, understanding it as something richer than the simple forward march of identical units, represents one of the castle's most valuable, if least acknowledged gifts to those who dwell within its walls. While nobles might measure time primarily through events and accomplishments, you've learned to appreciate its texture and quality, finding meaning in its passage, rather than merely using it as a medium for achievement. The weight of time here, while sometimes heavy, also provides the necessary gravity that gives significance to even the most ordinary moments of your castle existence. The castle exists as much in silence as in sound, with countless critical communications occurring without words. You've become fluent in this quiet language through years of observation and participation, learning to read the meaningful gaps between spoken phrases, the eloquent restraint of certain gestures, the deliberate absences that speak as clearly as any declaration. Hierarchy expresses itself most powerfully through what remains unspoken. The Lord rarely needs to articulate his authority explicitly. It manifests in the automatic widening of corridors as servants press themselves against walls when he passes the instantaneous quiet that falls over a room upon his entrance, the careful neutrality that overtakes previously animated faces when he approaches a conversation. You've learned that true power seldom announces itself verbally. Rather, it creates spaces of silence that others must navigate. Emotions flow beneath the castle's surface, like underground streams rarely breaking into visible expression, yet influencing every interaction. The steward's grief, following his wife's death, went unmentioned directly, yet everyone adjusted their approach to him for months afterward. Requests made more carefully, reports delivered more concisely, small considerations offered without acknowledgement. This collective wordless response provided support without violating the dignity of privacy that his position required. The complex web of romantic and sexual relationships among castle inhabitants operates largely through unspoken signals. The kitchen maid and stable boy, whose fingers touch slightly longer than necessary when passing objects, the widowed noblewoman and her lady's companion, whose affection manifests in how they unconsciously mirror each other's movements, the aging knight and the falconer, who somehow always find themselves walking the perimeter together at dusk. These connections develop, evolve, and sometimes end with minimal verbal confirmation, protected by collective discretion. History reverberates through present silence. In ways you've learned to perceive, certain topics remain conspicuously unaddressed. The previous lord's youngest son, who disappeared during the last conflict, and whose name is never mentioned, the section of the East Wing left uninhabited after a fire whose cause no one discusses, the portrait in the gallery whose face has been carefully, deliberately damaged. These absences in conversation map the castle's emotional territory as clearly as any document could, warning aware listeners away from dangerous ground. Knowledge itself is often communicated through significant omission rather than explicit instruction. When training new servants, experienced staff rarely list every possible mistake, but instead focus on correct procedure, allowing the consequences of error to remain implied rather than enumerated. When explaining castle protocols, certain exceptions are demonstrated rather than articulated. The particular noble who must never be interrupted despite general rules about responding promptly to questions, the specific corridor that servants avoid at certain hours without being told why. This transmission of wisdom through selective silence creates a shared understanding that remains flexible enough to adapt to changing circumstances. Status distinctions manifest in who must articulate needs versus who can expect silent anticipation of their requirements. The Lord rarely requests water explicitly. The cup is filled before emptiness becomes noticeable. Conversely, even the most long-standing servant must verbally request permission for absences or special considerations, regardless of how predictable or reasonable these might be. You've observed how this asymmetry of expression reinforces power, relationships more effectively than any stated rule could accomplish. Resistance and disagreement find expression through silence as often as through direct confrontation. The cook who creates a perfectly adequate but uninspired meal when ordered to accommodate a disliked guest's visit. The groom who takes slightly longer than necessary to prepare horses when the steward demands them during servants' normal mealtime. The slight delay before compliance that stops short of disobedience, yet communicates displeasure clearly to those attuned to such subtle temporal shifts. These quiet forms of resistance provide essential pressure release within a system that rarely permits direct challenge to authority. Loyalty and care often manifest most powerfully in what is not revealed. The servant who notices but never mentions the Lord's daughter's secret trips to the village. The guard who adjusts his rounds to avoid interrupting the private conversations he wasn't meant to overhear. The laundress who removes evidence of accidents or indiscretions without comment. This protective silence creates essential breathing room within the otherwise closely observed life of the castle. allowing humanity to exist alongside duty and protocol. Physical communication replaces verbal exchange in countless daily interactions. The slight pressure of a hand on a shoulder that signals, "I'll finish this task while you rest." The particular way platters are positioned during service that indicates which servers should approach in which order without a word being spoken. The subtle redirection of attention through body positioning that allows a colleague to correct a mistake before it becomes noticeable to higher authorities. This corporeal vocabulary develops through years of working in close proximity, creating efficient coordination that requires no audible disruption. Perhaps most significant is what remains unsaid about the future, the collective awareness of mortality and impermanence that permeates castle life without requiring explicit acknowledgement. Everyone understands that roles will outlast their current occupants, that skills must be transmitted before they're lost, that individual lives represent brief tenancies within a continuing institution. This shared recognition of temporal limits influences daily interactions and decisions, while rarely surfacing in direct conversation, creating a framework of meaning that transcends individual experience. You've come to value this dimension of unsaid communication as much as or more than explicit exchange. The restraint it requires has shaped your character over years, developing an appreciation for nuance and implication that makes every interaction richer and more layered. You've learned that true understanding often resides not in what is proclaimed, but in what is perceived beyond words. The knowing glance between longtime colleagues, the careful recalibration of space when someone enters a room, the quality of silence that follows significant news. In a world where literacy remains limited and written records reflect only official narratives, this parallel system of unspoken understanding preserves essential truths that might otherwise be lost. The servant's knowledge of which noble families actually treat their staff with dignity regardless of public reputation. The collective memory of which castle spaces proved safest during previous conflicts. The accumulated wisdom about which local plants heal burns most effectively despite their absence from formal medical texts. This silent transmission of crucial information provides continuity and protection across generations, and invisible inheritance as valuable as any documented legacy. As you move through your day within these ancient walls, you participate in this eloquent silence, knowing when words would be redundant or even diminishing, recognizing when presence alone provides what's needed, understanding that some communications reach deeper when they bypass language entirely. This fluency in the unsaid doesn't replace verbal exchange, but exists alongside it, creating a more complete understanding of your shared world than either system could provide alone. Within the castle's stratified society, moments of genuine human connection transcend rank and role, occurring most authentically through the direct contact of hands meeting in various contexts. You've come to treasure these instances when touch temporarily bridges the carefully maintained distances between different castle inhabitants, creating brief but meaningful acknowledgments of shared humanity. The passing of objects provides the most common opportunity for hands to meet legitimately across social boundaries. When you place a filled goblet into a noble's fingers, there is an unavoidable moment when both sets of hands share the weight of the vessel, a functional connection that sometimes extends just slightly longer than strictly necessary, containing unspoken recognition that transcends the mere transfer of wine. You've noticed how some nobles deliberately avoid this contact, carefully taking items without touching the hands that offer them, while others allow or even slightly prolong these moments of connection. In times of illness or injury, touch crosses normal boundaries out of necessity. You recall when the Lord's youngest son fell from his horse and you were the nearest adult, your hands stabilizing his broken arm while he cried against your shoulder, rank temporarily irrelevant in the face of pain and fear. Or the night when fever swept through the castle and everyone capable of standing helped tend the sick, regardless of station, cool hands pressing against hot foreheads in identical gestures of care, whether the brow belonged to noble or servant. Ceremonial occasions create formalized opportunities for hands to meet, the ritual greeting of important visitors where even the lowest kitchen maid might find her hand briefly clasped in welcome, the distribution of special bread during harvest celebrations where the Lord himself places a piece directly into each person's palm, symbolizing the shared dependence on successful crops. These choreographed interactions acknowledge interdependence that everyday castle operation often obscures temporarily, suspending ordinary restrictions on physical contact between ranks. Children create natural disruptions in the careful boundaries between touch and distance. The young noble daughter who grabbed your hand for balance while learning to walk unconcerned with the impropriety of such familiar contact. The Lord's grandson who falls asleep against your shoulder while you've been assigned to watch him during a lengthy ceremony. His complete trust in your physical support, rendering protocol momentarily irrelevant. These innocent connections remind everyone that the social distinctions adults maintain are learned rather than innate, constructed rather than natural. Work itself sometimes requires collaborative physical effort that temporarily erases usual separations. During the castle fire 10 years ago, human chains formed spontaneously to pass water buckets, hands connecting with whoever stood nearby, regardless of rank or role. When moving the great table in the hall for special occasions, even nobles might join the effort if present, their hands briefly aligned with servants in shared purpose. These moments of collective physical endeavor create a particular quality of connection, the shared burn of effort, the coordinated rhythm of movement, the tangible accomplishment visible to all participants, regardless of their ordinary relationship. Age and infirmity can transform touch across normal boundaries. You remember how the previous Lord, in his final years, sometimes steadied himself with a hand on the nearest person's shoulder when rising, whether that happened to be his son or a serving girl, the elderly noblewoman who accepts help with stares from whoever stands nearby, her dignity finding new expression in gracious acknowledgement of assistance rather than insisted independence. These necessary supports acknowledge the universal journey of the body through time that no rank can ultimately transcend. Music and dance create sanctioned opportunities for physical connection that might otherwise be forbidden. During certain festival celebrations, traditional dances require participants to join hands regardless of status, creating circles and chains that temporarily embody community rather than hierarchy. Musicians teaching their craft necessarily guide students' hands on instruments, positioning fingers correctly regardless of who those fingers belong to. These artistic contexts suspend ordinary restrictions through appeal to cultural traditions that predate current social arrangements. Religious observances similarly create moments where hands meet across boundaries. The passing of peace during chapel services, where each person briefly clasps the hands of those standing nearby, murmuring blessings regardless of rank. The distribution of ceremonial wine, where all drink from the same cup handed from person to person throughout the assembled community. These ritual connections remind participants of spiritual equality that exists alongside worldly distinction of shared mortality and hope that transcend temporary social positions. The castle itself sometimes demands physical connection through its very architecture and maintenance. The human chain required to move heavy stones during repairs where strength and positioning matter more than social standing. The narrow passageways where people must press against one another to allow passage, regardless of who they might be. The great hall doors that require two people to open them fully, creating momentary partnerships between whoever happens to arrive simultaneously. These structural necessities create brief collaborations that the building itself imposes on its inhabitants. Most poignant are the unplanned moments of human contact that occur during heightened emotional states. The instinctive grasp of nearby hands when sudden bad news is announced, momentarily uniting lord and servant in shared shock. The spontaneous embrace after narrowly avoided disaster relief, temporarily overwhelming protocol. The steadying touch on a trembling shoulder during grief offered and accepted without consideration of appropriate distance. These authentic connections reveal how quickly artificial separations can dissolve when fundamental human experiences assert their priority. You've observed how the quality of touch itself communicates volumes beyond the mere fact of contact. The brisk, impersonal handling that reduces another person to an object. The deliberately gentle pressure that acknowledges vulnerability, the firm grip that conveys confidence and support, the hesitant contact that signals respect for boundaries, the lingering connection that suggests reluctance to break contact. These tactile conversations occur continuously throughout castle life, creating a complex language of physical communication that operates alongside verbal exchange. As you've aged within these walls, you've developed your own relationship with this dimension of human connection. The efficiency with which you now perform necessary physical assistance without drawing attention to the contact itself. The calm assurance with which you guide younger servants through tasks requiring demonstration rather than explanation. The gentle adjustments you make to accommodate others' comfort with physical proximity or distance. This tactile wisdom represents one of your less visible but most valuable contributions to the castle community, facilitating necessary connections while respecting essential boundaries. In a world increasingly governed by written rules and formal structures, these moments when hands meet across dividing lines maintain essential human recognition that no social system can entirely suppress. They remind everyone within the castle walls that beneath the differences of dress speech, education, and authority exists a shared physical reality. The warmth of skin, the strength or fragility of bones, the common need for support and connection that ultimately unites all who dwell within these ancient stones. As twilight gathers outside your small window, bringing another day within these walls to its close, you find yourself engaged in a ritual as familiar as the stones themselves. The careful selection and arrangement of memory, like a gardener deciding which plants to nurture and which to prune. You've learned that remembrance is not passive reception but active creation, a deliberate crafting of the internal landscape you inhabit regardless of external circumstances. You choose to remember individual faces rather than collective categories. The Lord becomes not simply a symbol of authority, but a specific man whose left eyebrow rises slightly when he's skeptical, but trying to remain polite. The head cook is not merely her function, but a woman whose laugh reveals a missing tooth. She covers with her hand, except when truly delighted. The visiting noble, who treated you roughly last winter, remains in memory not as representative of all aristocrats, but as a particular person, perhaps shaped by troubles you'll never know. This individualized remembering preserves humanity within a system that often reduces people to their roles. You choose to remember moments of unexpected beauty that punctuated ordinary days. Sunlight entering the kitchen at a particular angle that transformed rising flour dust into a cloud of gold. The perfect formation of migrating birds framed precisely by the courtyard opening as you looked upward at exactly the right moment. The first snowfall of winter catching in a young stable boy's eyelashes as he looked upward, in wonder his face momentarily transforming into something ancient and new simultaneously. These fleeting visions cost nothing, belong completely to those who notice them, and remain immune to the castle's careful accounting of ownership. You choose to remember kindnesses, both those you've received and those you've witnessed others extend. The steward who pretended not to notice when you accidentally broke a serving dish during your first week quietly disposing of evidence before others could assign blame. The noblewoman who ensured her outgrown clothes were passed to the servant with the most children rather than the one who most directly served hers. The stable master who taught you to ride during precious free hours simply because he recognized your interest, though such a skill served no practical purpose for your position. These acts of gratuitous generosity reveal the persistent possibility of choice even within constrained circumstances. You choose to remember the physical pleasures that punctuate a life of labor, the particular sweetness of the first autumn apple, eaten in the brief shade break during harvest, the relief of cool water on feet aching from hours of standing during formal dinners, the weight of castle cats settling onto your lap during rare moments of sitting rest their vibrating purrs transferring into your tired bones. These sensory joys require no permission, incur no cost, yet provide sustenance as real as bread for the journey through difficult days. You choose to remember achievements invisible to official recognition, the year you finally mastered the perfect balance of herbs in the winter stew that sustains the castle through coldest months, the system you developed for folding linens that saved collective hours of work each week and continues to be used, though few remember its origin. The young servant you guided through initial homesickness, who now trains others with the same patience you showed her. These quiet accomplishments may never be recorded in castle chronicles, yet represent genuine contributions to its continuing life. You choose to remember growth and change rather than static conditions. The courtyard tree that has doubled in size since your arrival, offering shade where none existed before. The gradual softening of relations between kitchen and stable staff after years of territorial tension, resulting in more efficient cooperation during busy times. Your own hands developing skills that once seemed impossibly complex until repetition rendered them automatic. This attention to incremental transformation reveals possibilities for change in situations that might otherwise appear permanent and unchangeable. You choose to remember language that elevated rather than diminished. The old gardener who referred to vegetable tending as negotiating with living beings who have their own intentions. The nurse who spoke of difficult children as those still finding their true shape in the world. The falconer who described his relationship with birds as a conversation between different types of freedom. This careful, respectful terminology created conceptual spaces where dignity could flourish, even in humble circumstances, offering subtle resistance to frameworks that would reduce living beings to mere resources. You choose to remember times when hierarchy briefly dissolved into shared humanity. The midwinter celebration, when extended snowstorms prevented noble visitors from departing, forcing improvised sleeping arrangements and communal meals where normal separations temporarily suspended. The summer drought, when water rationings applied to everyone, regardless of rank, creating a common concern that transcended ordinary divisions. The child's funeral, where grief rendered distinctions of status momentarily irrelevant as the entire castle community acknowledged unbearable loss. These exceptional circumstances revealed what ordinary routine often obscured: the fundamental similarities that underlie apparent differences. You choose to remember connections to those who occupied your role before your birth and those who will continue after your death. The particular way of turning bread dough, taught by someone who learned it from someone who learned it decades before you arrived. The seasonal rhythms of castle life that will persist long after your individual contribution ends. The young girl recently arrived from the village who watches your movements with careful attention, already absorbing techniques and approaches she'll one day pass to others. This temporal continuity provides meaning beyond individual experience, locating your brief tenure within an ongoing human story. Most essentially, you choose to remember your own capacity for choice itself, the internal freedom that persists regardless of external constraint, the small decisions made hundreds of times daily about how to perform tasks, how to interact with others, how to direct your attention and allocate your care. The interior life that remains yours, alone to cultivate, prune, and harvest, regardless of who claims your time or labor. The quiet recognition that while circumstances may determine much of what happens to you, they never entirely dictate who you become through your response to those circumstances. As darkness completes its claim on the day and you prepare for sleep, these carefully tended memories create a personal refuge no physical space could provide. They constitute a form of wealth immune to taxation, a private territory no authority can fully enter, a legacy you carry with you through each day within these ancient walls. And in this deliberate remembering, this selection of what to preserve and what to release, you exercise a sovereignty more enduring than any claimed by those whose titles and lands will eventually pass to others, just as the castle itself has witnessed the rise and fall of family names while the stones themselves remain. What you choose to remember becomes in the end who you are, a self-constructed, not from external markers of status or possession, but from the accumulated attention of a lifetime, the gathered harvest of noticing, valuing, and preserving what truly matters in a world that often assigns importance by very different measures. This internal cultivation represents your most significant achievement within the castle walls, invisible on any record, yet as real and consequential as the stones themselves.